Hello, hello. Thank you so much for showing up this afternoon. I've got a pop quiz for you, and it is, when you think of entrepreneur, who comes to mind? Now, typically, this is the popular image of entrepreneurship in America. But what if we began to think of young black men as a new class of entrepreneurs? And what if they were encouraged to participate in the rediscovery of our economy and re-energizing our economy, right? So when I say young black men, what does that conjure up? For the most part, if we're honest, it might very well be the same image that the NYPD has used to devise their notorious stop and frisk policy. Or it might be the endless stream of local news mugshots, or a street corner with sagging pants and hoodies. And we have a lot of systemic notions about these young men. And of course, many of them have internalized these notions themselves. It's hard not to. You can test this for yourself, as a matter of fact. Project Implicit is a virtual laboratory maintained by Harvard, and Project Implicit has an online test that allows us to detect hidden biases. And what Project Implicit demonstrates is that for the most part, we're all fundamentally biased in some way or another. But the degree of bias that whites have of blacks is what I believe gets in the way of us really taking seriously this idea that these young men can actually play a meaningful role as entrepreneurs. Case in point, a friend of mine, not too long ago rather, had gone to a presentation, and the presentation topic was scouring the world for entrepreneurial talent to bring back here to Charlotte. And she posed the question, well, why don't we tap the latent entrepreneurial talent that resides in our jails? You could hear a pin drop, right? So what I want us to do this afternoon is just to take a moment, suspend our disbelief, and reimagine these young men. And in so doing, perhaps we can learn something on purpose in the process. Now, reimagining these young men, other than what we've manufactured about them, and more importantly for them to appreciate what their possibilities might be, requires a shift. And it's not so much a shift in our thinking, rather it's a shift in what we believe can be true. That's much more powerful, more potent. Some months ago, I had an opportunity to interview a young man from Durham by the name of Lawrence Carpenter, and his story illustrates what I mean by this shift. Now, his history is really a prototypical stereotype, if you will. All right, a young African-American male, mother on drugs, so-so education, limited opportunities in a marketplace usually closed to people like him. And for a lot of guys like Lawrence, drug dealing is the only viable economic option that they're presented with, and that's reinforced. And he chose that option. And he said to himself, hey, listen, you know, I've got the guts and the guile and the ingenuity to excel at a trade where many have tried and failed. And he did, big time, until he got caught. Now, the socioeconomic problems facing inner-city America really require a rescue of sorts. And who better to lead the charge than young black men? And this is why I believe this. Because black women, for the most part, have had to take on too much of the burden of their community's woes, entirely too much. And by the way, that's true for women all throughout society, but that's a topic of another TED Talk, all right? But were it not for black women, their community, even with all of its issues, would have long since disintegrated. So it's high time that these young men come to the rescue of their mothers and daughters, sisters, grandmothers, themselves, and each other. Did you know that approximately 45% of black males ages 14 to 25 graduate high school, end up either unemployed, incarcerated, or dead? And the reasons for this are ossified in America. But intertwined with this, and we can't overlook this point, is a lack of personal responsibility and its consequences. And at its core is being present to possibilities. Realizing this, however, requires a shift. Again, a shift in believing what can be true. So what if? What if instead of marginalizing and demonizing these young men, what if we solicited their input? And what if we included them in a conversation about how to create economic vitality in our inner cities? Will we not be better off if we empowered them? I mean, if we were honest, most would say that they want to contribute. They want to be part of the conversation. They want to participate. In fact, they want to do something of substance and value and meaning with their lives. And for us to be so swift to warehouse or discard these young men without making use of their talents is a sin of riches that we can ill afford as a country. So what if we reimagine them as a new class of entrepreneurs capable of great things? You know, the average cost of a prisoner here in North Carolina is about $28,000 per year, coupled with a 40% recidivism rate. And this is costing North Carolina taxpayers $1.2 billion per year. And this can be replicated all throughout the country. All right, but the costs of incarceration don't stop at the state coffers. Rather, they sap livelihoods from those affected communities that systematically lose men in their prime. Pew Research points out that when folks return from incarceration, they're likely to work fewer weeks per year, receive lower wages, and bring home much less earnings. And when we see this, the brunt of this is borne disproportionately by mostly young, undereducated men of color. Now, the cost associated with this and the legacy of these costs really amounts to a tremendous drag on our country's economy, especially at a time when we need all hands on deck and shoulders to the plow, right? As our president alluded to the other day. So, we've got a gentleman, Lawrence Carpenter, who decided after his second bid in prison that he had to turn his life around. If he was going to realize the kind of lifestyle that he wanted for his family and himself. Now, you also have to imagine that here's a guy that was a drug dealer. So the options for him of finding a good job, any job for that matter, much less the kind that would pay the kind of money that he wanted, was slim to none. But it occurred to him, while he was trying to figure out what it is that he was going to do with his life, it occurred to him that he had skills, sure enough business skills. As a matter of fact, what he learned in the dope trade was transferable to him running his own legit business. Interestingly enough, the Justice Policy Institute points out that ex-offender recidivism is much higher for those that come back into the community, that re-enter the community and don't have any employment. All right? And this is a tremendous cost on societies, especially those communities where they re-enter into. And so what the Justice Policy Institute determined was that it makes a lot of sense for self-employment and entrepreneurship as a viable option for ex-offenders. Go figure. So what Lawrence decided was that he was going to try his hand at a commercial cleaning business, using the same guts and guile that served him well before. And this is the same sort of drive and determination that many of these guys that I've been talking about today exhibit. It's the same fire in the belly and good old-fashioned American ingenuity that, according to the popular portrayal of the entrepreneur, doesn't include guys like Lawrence. Yet he's doing $2.5 million a year in sales. He has 70 full and part-time employees. And on top of that, he's helped 8 others start their own businesses. Now imagine the economic multiplier effect that Lawrence Carpenter has in his hometown of Durham, with these 70 employees, many of whom would not have been hired elsewhere, or the 8 business persons that he's helped to mentor. See, this is what I'm talking about when I say a new class of entrepreneurs coming from young black men. This is what I mean by that. Hopefully you can begin to see that, right? And hopefully you can begin to see how shift happens. Now this brings me to City Startup Labs, and I know you've been wondering when I was going to get around to this. I designed this as an entrepreneur's academy, really zeroing in on this population. And we'll be launching our first pilot here in Charlotte in collaboration with the Urban League. We're going to take an initial cohort of 25 students through an accelerated, almost boot camp style instruction for 15 weeks. And we'll pace these students through 4 modules, including incubation. We'll be using the Kauffman Foundation's programs as our core curriculum. And we'll also be offering micro-lending counseling and Kickstart loans. Undergirding this entire process is a support system that we're building so that these young men know that we've got their backs. The last thing we want them to think is that we're not supporting them. So we start off with a real deep look at who they are and why they are where they are. All right, it's important to establish this as a foundation, and the foundation includes accountability and responsibility and integrity and authenticity, not just for business, but for life. From there, we'll look at the entrepreneurial mindset and what some of the rigors and the challenges and the hurdles that they themselves are going to have to meet and overcome in running their own businesses. And we'll be using what I like to call the Booker T. Washington principle. That's casting your buckets down where you are. And what I mean by that is that you really can leverage what you have. You don't need a lot of resources in order to create and run a sustainable business. And we'll show them how to do that. And we'll also show them that this venture that they're about to undertake is more than a notion. All right? From there, we'll roll up our sleeves and immerse them into the fundamentals of how to plan and run and sustain a startup in their venture. Now, we have no illusions. We're not looking to pop out junior MBAs at the end of this process, all right? But what we want to give these young men is the opportunity to reimagine themselves as productive businessmen who are eager to learn and make a difference. Now, Lawrence Carpenter, he's no longer up there, but Lawrence Carpenter didn't have the benefit of someone showing him how to run a business. He told me he had to fall down and get back up and fall down and get back up, fall down and get back up. But we want to give our students the benefit of best practices so they don't have to reinvent the wheel. And we know that they're going to encounter a lot of challenges that will surely test them, but probably no more so than they've been tested already in life. All right? So fundamentally, the bottom line here is that we want to empower these young men so that they can become a new class of entrepreneurs starting right here in Charlotte. Thank you.